The BT series of tanks are a unique group of little machines, and while they're not remembered for combat effectiveness, they are most certainly remembered for their absurd speed, and their meme potential that comes with this in video games. But to understand the BT as a whole, we first have to look at their origins, which leads us to their designer, John Walter Christie. John Walter Christie is maybe not the most likely man in the position to become a famous tank designer, especially not for a tank that would be famously used by the Soviets. He was born in 1865 in the USA of all places. At the time... Hey, when does the tank part start?
Are we there yet?
We get there when we get there!
As I was about to say, he was born in 1865 in the USA of all places, at a time tanks or even cars were still in the future. He started his career at the Delamater Iron Works and studied engineering in New York, and was involved in the construction of steamships and the development of early submarines. Yes, this man will become a tank designer. At the same time though, he started to conceptualize and build front-driven cars as a side project, which he promoted at various speedways, going as far as to compete in the 1907 Grand Prix. After no major success and some serious accidents with his designs, he would turn away from the racing business. But not entirely, as we will find out later. Instead, he started work on designing a taxi and later a fire tractor, seeing no success in the former but quite good one in the latter. His first successful contract with the military, after a failed cooperation in 1916, would come in the form of an amphibious tank design for the United States Marine Corps, which was tested in an exercise in Puerto Rico in 1924, and despite failing during the first attempt, a follow-up go resulted in a perfect landing him the contract. After this initial success, Christie decided to continue work on armored vehicles, which turned out not to be so successful, the main issue being poor cross-country performance. So he sat down and set about to design a tank that would solve his issues. This tank would become the M1928. This vehicle would form the basis for the subject of the second part. But first things first, the M1928 was a lightly armored tank carrying big road wheels for good cross-country performance. And he would have the ability to remove the tracks and drive with just road wheels for higher speed on roads. Christie's passion of sport cars, as I mentioned, hadn't left him completely yet. Additionally, he introduced a spring-loaded assembly for every single wheel, which again helped with cross-country performance and eased the ride for the crew inside. This latter feature reduced internal space quite significantly, and this together with a focus on speed would lead to very thin armor, about 12.7mm or half an inch thick. Christie was aware of this issue and attempted to compensate for this with introducing sloped armor, to improve the capability of the little armor he had available. While this wasn't hugely successful, it at least improved the capabilities of the armor somewhat. Armament consisted out of a 37mm M1916 infantry support gun, which was originally made by the French, and caliber 50 12.7mm M2 Browning heavy machine gun, and an caliber 30 7.62mm M1919A4 Browning machine gun, the latter two being standard weapons on American tanks from the 1920s deep into the Cold War onwards. All in all, this made for quite the advanced tank design, and most of these features would be retained on the latter BT tanks. Plus, the speed focus paid off, achieving average speeds of 43 km per hour on trials, against the Army's own design of 16 km per hour. But in the present, the US Army had little to no interest in the machine, deeming its armor too thin and its amazing speed not so beneficial. And despite one Lieutenant Colonel George S. Patton showing great interest in his designs, this was not enough to save him the contract. While the US Army hadn't shown interest, a number of foreign governments had, and so Christie, being a businessman, turned to the global market. First off, the Polish government wanted to buy one of his models, but Christie failed to deliver the vehicle in time and the payment had to be returned. The British government also wanted to make a contract. This one was more successful, in them buying one of his last prototypes. They refined the suspension system further and would mount this on their new Cruiser Mark III, also known as the A-13. But the one we are most concerned about is the Soviet government, which paid for two further advanced models from Christie, the M1931, with spare parts and the production rights, for just $4,000. The vehicles were shipped to the USSR, falsely labeled as agricultural tractors. They weren't fitted with turrets because weapon shipments were heavily restricted at the time. And so, with the vehicles en route to the USSR in early 1931, we will leave off Christie in the story and head back into the BT tanks in Russian service in the next part. I see you there, have a nice day.